This is Writer Life, a podcast about writing, life, coffee and conversation with Rob and John Morgan.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Writer Life. I think anyone who's kind of read my books or had a conversation with me pretty much knows that I don't fear controversy when it comes to writing. I don't believe in censorship, and I believe that everyone or every writer should actually portray life as they really see it. If you look back to some of the greatest writers of history, you see Shakespeare and Charles Dickens and so forth, and they wrote life as they saw it. They wrote the real gritty truth. And to be honest, it does feel at times like there is kind of a shift away from sort of truthful writing to some sort of make-believe fantasy, sort of idealized way of writing. And it does concern me because, all through history, writers have been the people who've documented life as it's meant to be or as it was at their time. And they've done it in a very honest and open way, even when it was controversial. I can remember somebody telling me that there's too much swearing in the Curio Chronicles. Well, yeah, there is, and the reason for that is because that's how a lot of our young really are. Every second word is a swear word these days. And so I wrote an honest depiction. Some of my older readers were not comfortable with that. And I asked the question then, why? Because that's how it really is. And maybe you need to know that. A writer, first and foremost, in my opinion, needs to be free in order to be able to translate life into a fiction or a fantasy story or a gritty tale of truth, no matter what. I'm often told that I'm lucky because I live in a free and fair country. The UK is a democracy. We get to vote. So we do play a role in who gets to run the country. And yes, we are free to do that. We have freedom of thought and freedom of speech. And when that is compared to communist states of the world, it's true. By comparison, I'm a relatively free person. I'm a writer and now a podcaster. Or maybe I should use the new socially defined term, which is something actually that I hate, which is content creator. But that really is neither here nor there. I believe all writers should be people who peel back the layers of what surrounds them and examine it very closely. They should then take what they see completely and utterly apart so that they really understand it. And when they do that, then they should write about it. Because in many ways, that is the only real way to openly discuss many of the subjects of today's world, which is by highlighting things in a fantasy situation so that the readers can look deeper into a story and actually see some truth of not only life in general, but also their life. Over the last few years, I've watched how the circle of censorship has tightened, and more voices are being removed from the social narrative as they conflict with the views of those who feel that their voices should be stronger. Something as simple as not agreeing with someone's opposing point of view has now become radicalized. And, it's now seen and labeled as hate speech or discriminatory. And there's a long list of words, like bigot and fascist and all sorts of stuff that's bandied around. And actually, most of the time from what I can see, the person that is inflicting all this vile hatred towards you because you disagree with them is actually far more oppressive than you were being when you disagreed with them. We've kind of reached a point now where a manufactured worldview has taken over. And so we must all now submit or be punished with exclusion, which for writers is actually a really, really worrying trend. It may come as a bit of a surprise, but the truth is we're not quite as free as maybe we would like to believe we are. even in our so-called democratic, free-thinking and free-speaking countries that we all live in. There is some form of oppression in every government and capitalistic system. It is just far more subtle than maybe that of a communist country. But all you have to do really is just open your eyes and really look, and it's right there in plain sight. What? I hear you all gasp. No, that cannot possibly be true. But the point here is that in the modern world of today, most of us, one way or another, bend to the will of those of power. And I would certainly say that a great many bend of their own free will. And most of the time, they're not really that aware of it, because to a degree, it is the perception of freedom that is the most important factor. We perceive that we are free, but actually, we have no idea of how ruled over we have become. Let me explain this, possibly with a better example and in a little more detail. In the 1960s, a psychologist with the name of G.R. Stevenson conducted an experiment using 5 monkeys. They are our closest human primate and highly intelligent, and so he wanted to use them to find out how easy it would be to condition them. The 5 monkeys were placed in a cage, and from the roof there were hanging bunches of bananas. Now obviously, monkeys love bananas, so one of them decided to climb up and get one. When the monkey climbed up, the other 4 monkeys in the cage were all sprayed with ice-cold water, which really surprised and shocked them. After a few repeats of this process, the monkeys then began to understand that if you go for a banana, you're gonna get sprayed with ice-cold water. And so what then developed was, if a monkey tried to climb up the bars of the cage to get to the bananas, the other 4 monkeys would pull it down and beat it up. All 5 monkeys learned that those bananas on the roof brought shock or pain. They were perfectly conditioned. The next step of the experiment was one of the monkeys was taken out and replaced with a brand new monkey who knew absolutely nothing about the water. So naturally, being a new monkey, he went to get a banana, and the other 4 beat him up. So even the new monkey learned the rules of the cage. Now the crazy thing about this is that over time all 5 monkeys were replaced with brand new monkeys. So there was actually no monkey in that cage that had ever been splashed or sprayed with ice cold water. And yet, if one went to get a banana, the other 4 beat it up. The pattern had become ingrained in all 5 new monkeys, which had learned to conform to the rules of the cage without ever getting wet. The motivation was initially fear of ice-cold water, which was then replaced by violence. But the result was the same. All of the monkeys obeyed the rule of the cage. And yet, and here is kind of the sting, none of those monkeys actually knew why, because none of them had ever been sprayed with ice-cold water. A pattern of controlled behaviour had been maintained, which was exactly the same as the first 5 monkeys. This experiment has become really well known, especially in the corridors of power. And crazy as it sounds, in the world today, that one psychological experiment is very much an ongoing thing that has also been applied to humans. And it really is very relevant, especially when one looks at social media and mainstream media and the rules of control that come with it. Now, if you don't believe me, just go out on the street and misgender someone or use the wrong pronouns. You will see aggression and abusive behaviour towards you. Now, if you don't fancy that, and let's be honest, who would? Push into a queue and jump in front of the majority of the waiting line. or try to walk into a high-end restaurant looking scruffy and poor and acting unrefined. You will soon realize very quickly where your place in everybody's life is. Because whether you want to believe it or not, you are conforming to a certain kind of controlled behavior. And it is usually motivated by fear or some kind of abuse and shame. I've seen fear a great deal in my life used to control people. As I look back now, I saw how single parents were treated by society in the early 1980s. The government in the UK of that time deemed them much lesser and actually slandered them publicly, so that the whole of society turned against them. I watched the very same thing happen as unemployed people had their benefits slashed and were labelled scroungers by the government, and they became despised by society to the point where some of them actually took their own lives. I saw firsthand the ridicule of Brexiteers over the vote to leave the European Union, or how the truckers of Canada were labelled unsuitable and bigots and attacked by militarised police sent in by Trudeau's government for peacefully protesting. I'm never going to forget how badly the unvaxxed were shamed and ridiculed during the pandemic in what was very, very shameful behaviour from a government and a media who were using fear as a weapon to gain conformity. You know, the rules of civility, the rules of discrimination went straight out of the window, and a person's right to personal autonomy was absolutely, completely and utterly disregarded. You know, and the list goes on and on and on. And this dates right back through the last 50 years. Those who have power and means shape society, and they use fear, or they tempt you into believing something that's not exactly true to control society. But they make it so appealing, you simply go along with it. You still don't believe me? Just take a listen to episode 22 of this podcast. I show how people have been manipulated to hate their own bodies using subtle advertising and agenda-driven media to shame the skin that you were in. In episode 14, The Sham of Shame, I highlight how those of power use shaming, labelling and name-calling around sexual slurs to control the young. And I've used all of these in the books that I write. You see, I'm a watcher of life, an observer of what surrounds me, and that is where I draw my inspiration from in order to write the things that I do. And I show my readers the world, but I do it by placing it into a fake or fictional fantasy situation. As to the Kingdom is a post-apocalyptic or dystopian fantasy, and within the pages of the whole series there's actually quite a lot of really good wisdom, which is based on observation. And some of the aspects of the books do give great advice, and all you have to do is take off the blindfold and see the world as it truly is. Just peel back the layers and read the whole series. The third book in the Heirs to the Kingdom series is titled The Darkness of Dunatar. And, to be honest, that was not actually my very first title for it. For most of the time I was writing it, my first choice for the book was going to be called The Dark Rock of Dunatar. One of the reasons why I changed the title at the last minute was because the book featured quite a lot of oppression in it, and I wanted that to be represented within the title. In the book, I illustrate how Mason Knox and his troops have used fear to create a whole small town of submissive people who follow a strict routine and follow a very set pattern of behaviour within the working complex of the Black City at Scarborough. In the book, Robbie and Rowan sneak into the city, and they get to see firsthand the working conditions of a people who are broken and oppressed under Mason's rule. And it really is very, very eye-opening for Robbie, who is used to a free, wild, open life. When they were finally ready to leave, Father Warren unbolted the doors, and they stepped out into the street filling with women and children, all heading for the market. Lee trailed behind them, as no bandit would ever be seen in the company of the priesthood. It also provided Lee with the opportunity to hang back and watch in case he was needed. Everybody walked on the left side of the road. This way the soldiers could control the flow of people in each direction easily. Father Warren had warned them not to look at the guards' faces. It appeared that this got them very angry, and they lashed out. Robbie and Rowan walked either side of the father, their long poles tapping the ground dimly as they walked. Robbie watched the silent masses as they quietly made their way up the street. It was odd how well behaved the children were as they walked with their heads down, holding the hands of their parents. He thought of the market day at Loxley, where the children ran wild, screaming and laughing as they played whilst their parents bought their goods. The market was bigger than Robbie had first expected. Hathersage had always been the biggest he'd known, with around 50 stalls. The market was vast, and he marvelled at the huge number of stalls. There had been at least 200, all lined out in a huge square. The people of the city mixed with bandits and a few woodsmen. It seemed that quite a few of the city dwellers lived here only by force and refused to give up their woodsman identities. The images for this part of the book come from looking back through my life and remembering seeing the images of poverty of Russia, China and North Korea in my youth. But when you consider the ease in which the media had all of us stand 6 feet apart, wear masks and wait patiently, absolutely afraid, that others were getting too close during the pandemic of 2020, which is only actually a few years ago, it's very easy to see how fast the majority of people will conform to a set routine of behaviour out of fear in today's world. Just like the 5 monkeys, people do not even understand why they have to do something, but they will do it, and they'll do it simply because all of the others are, and they feel threatened. It's a principle the fashion industry has taken great advantage of and has, to a degree, has won complete control over most people with their rhetorics of discounts and advertising of the perfect body type and the right brand of clothing that one should wear. You can laugh, but if you think back to how many trends you followed in your life just so you could appear acceptable in the eyes of others, it's quite eye-opening to realise. And if you take a look at the world today, you'll see all of the brands and slogans that are stamped across the chests of the fashion that people wear. Sports brands really do rule now, and they advertise absolutely for free because that's what they're doing. You are a walking advertisement, and it's right across the front of your clothing. Now, people are social animals. They desire being included, as Hitler found out in Nazi Germany. With the right amount of fear and propaganda, people will willingly give up their freedom and join the party, even if that means doing things that go against your belief system. As long as everyone else is doing it, well, they will too. Nothing really has changed that much. Today's social media and the mainstream media are massively powerful. And whether you want to believe it or not, there are many people out there who go against their own instincts and conform for no other reason than they do not want to stand alone and be singled out. Another, if not humorous at times, example of this, I wrote into Abigail's summer with the transient watch. Marjorie does not want undesirables in what she deems her village, and so in order to combat it, she labels all of those that she deems as unsuitable as transients. Her tactics are no different from Mason Knox in Heirs to the Kingdom, as she uses fear and propaganda to frighten the population into joining her. People who appear not to fit the narrative of Marjorie's idea of a dress code are watched and monitored by Marjorie's cronies, and then confronted and shamed, to the point that they actually leave the village. I think the most shocking thing about all of this is that Abigail actually lives in Woodden Dursley. She was born and raised there, and yet simply because she changed her fashion sense and dyed her hair black to match, she's actually afraid of going home, because she knows, Marjorie's gonna make her life hell. The scenario may be different, but it's the same tools of control as we see today, where people are shamed for no other reason than everybody is doing it and they're not, so they stand out. Just like the monkeys, nobody really knows why they do it. They just do, because, well, that's how it is now. Abby arrives home, and as she walks from the station, she becomes more and more afraid as she tries to hide her identity by keeping her head down. She even stops at the railway station and puts in contact lenses that make her eyes dark, because normally she has bright blue eyes, but she actually puts contacts in that give her black pupils. She's literally terrified as she walks down the high street with Birch. And it reads sort of like this. As we boldly strode up from Station Road towards the crossroads with Green Street and the main street, I felt confident and pretty happy. But maybe that was just the brandy kicking in. As we turned left into the main street, I felt my legs tremble, and I gripped Birch tighter. Birch gave a gasp. Holy shit, Dads! I only thought it was 2 or 3 shops, not this bloody many. When you said Village Green, I thought you meant like room size, big enough for a good sized picnic. But that bugger, well, that's big enough for a football pitch. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my eyes down and my face hidden from view. Keep walking. If we stop, Birch, I'm running back to the station. She patted my hand, and we began what would be indeed our walk of shame once my identity was revealed. As predicted, 2 strangers in the village of dubious description hit the gossip network within seconds, and I could hear the bleeps of text messages going off all across the green. In the tea rooms, the lace curtains were twitching, and Marjorie was on full alert with Lillian and Celia at her side as they typed at a fast rate into their phones. The transient alert had been activated, and all eyes were on the main street. Understanding the way the village worked, I was fully aware that every single person in the village had stopped what they were doing, and all eyes were on us. Birch did not seem to mind. She smiled and nodded to each person she spotted, staring out from behind their shop window displays. Birch leaned into me as I looked at the floor and quietly spoke. It's far more beautiful, a lot bigger than I pictured it, but I also see what you mean about Village of the Damned. I'm sure if they stare any harder, our heads will explode. All I could do was count the shops as I saw the bottom of the doors pass by. We'd passed the newsagent, the bakery, the gift shop, and we were level with the florists. My heart was racing inside me, and I felt all of the eyes were upon me. Even though I could not see them, I knew they were there, and it brought back all those feelings of walking with my father, aged 10. Children should be seen and not heard. A respectful, quiet child is a child worthy of praise. I walked behind him in his shadow. I was his shadow, and unable to step forward and be seen. Walking at the side of Birch, all I wanted was to be that unseen shadow again, out of sight, hidden from view, and not the centre of the village's attention. I remembered the scarecrow in Sutton's wheat field, stared at and alone. Everyone was aware of them, but no one cared enough to really know them. A lonely figure in full view. That was me. It had always been me. I gripped Birch's arm tighter. I think I'm going to cry, Birch. Her arm squeezed back. Don't you dare. You're better than all of these. Lift your head, Deds, and walk proud. Don't let these buggers get to you. I couldn't. My legs were trembling and the fear was too great. I looked at the floor and the shop doors. Thank God we were past the sweet shop, and I was level with the craft shop, when a loud ting echoed in my ears as we passed, and my heart, which was once again beating at an alarmingly fast rate, almost failed, as a voice stopped it dead. Abby? It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? I mean, who would be that afraid of going home to a place that they've always lived? But the simple facts are, there is far more truth in that passage than most readers will ever really realise, because that particular aspect of Abigail's summer is actually a direct take from my own private life. There was a time when I did not want to come home, as I was slandered and blamed for all of the wrongs of the avenue I lived on, for no other reason than the way that I dressed at that time. I gave a part of my life to Abigail, because even today, 40 years later, I've not forgotten the fear of the shaming that I would get when I returned home. Now, in this case, Abby is lucky because the person who identifies her is possibly the only person in the village who will not sit in judgment of her, which is her mum's best friend, Hattie. Hattie covers for Abby and allows her time to get away and get home. And yet, moments later, as Abby leaves the main street, it all becomes far too much for her, because the fear has not gone away, and even though she knows she's escaped for now, all it really has done is delay the inevitable. All of the village will side with Marjorie and attack her, and simply knowing that completely overwhelms her. On the corner of Manor Road, out of sight, I stopped and leaned against the wall. I was shaking from head to foot, and my heart was pounding, and I was finding it hard to breathe. Wait a moment, Birch. My heart's coming out my chest. I think I'm having a heart attack. I held my hand close to my chest, feeling like my throat was going to restrict and suffocate me. I leaned forward and put my hands on my knees and tried to breathe. Birch crouched down and took my hand. It's all right, Deds. It's just a mild panic attack. Here, squeeze my hand. I'm here, and I'm not leaving. Just breathe. I pulled the air in and out of my lungs. I desperately wanted to cry. I'm so sorry. I really am. I don't want to be like this, Birch. I felt the tears welling in my eyes and squeezed them closed. I was fine. Honestly, all year I've been fine. I should never have done it. I should have stayed as I was. I felt Birch's hands on my shoulders as she lifted me upright, and before I could blink, she was around me, pulling me close and tight. Her breast pressed into me, and her hand on the back of my head pushed me into her shoulder. And just feeling her warmth, her love, it was simply too much, and the tears flowed. Birch spoke very quietly. You wonderful sweet girl. What the hell have they done to you to end up like this? Come on, let it all out. You cannot let that live inside you. I hated myself for crying, but I just could not stop as I buried my head in her shoulder and felt it erupt out of me like a volcano. This is good, Deds. You must let it all out and take the pressure down. I'm sorry. I never realized it was this bad before, but please, have no fear. I'm with you, and I'm here for the summer. We will do this. We will do it together, and you will be free. I promise you, sweetie. It is so easy to talk about freedom. It's so simple to assume that we are free. But when I look at life today, I often wonder just exactly how free are we? The one thing I really love about Abigail's Summer and the following Curio Chronicle books is that it shows her journey from insecurity and overthinking into a position of strength. The curious live life on their own terms, but they do not expect others to live life the same as they do, which is directly opposite to the villagers who live under the domain of Marjorie and her rules of how to live. It is expected in society today that we conform to the pack and do nothing that contradicts their worldview, and most people choose to live that way, and at times that is often in conflict with who they actually are. This is something I've seen many times as I've talked with people to help them overcome difficulties around their own perceptions of themselves. And so I wanted to show the process of change, which Abby does with the aid of Birch. Being free is something that most people really do not understand. And so when it comes to exactly what the value of freedom is, I think it's become a sort of conflicted and confused message in today's modern world. For example, the other day I heard someone talk, and they said something that actually really shocked me. A CEO of a very large and powerfully influential financial firm openly admitted that totalitarian regimes are better for the financial markets because they are predictable and stable. The fact that they're predictable and stable because their government is ruthless and punishes everyone is irrelevant to them. He made it very clear in the video that I was watching on Twitter that democracy created unpredictability in the markets, and so therefore most markets would prefer to have all countries totalitarian because it creates higher profits for them. I sat watching this and understanding how accurate I was in the creation of Mason Knox. Men of power, they want control and nothing else. And in order to do that, they are really happy to enslave the whole world in order to gain more power, money, and status. It really is actually quite shocking to understand that this is part of what is supposed to be a more caring and open-minded modern world, where civil liberty is supposed to be for all of us. It does appear to me that in a world that is equal, some people are apparently far more equal than the others. Some would add that if you're so powerful to the point that you can only, openly talk about how it's your desire to enslave people, that in itself is indeed a form of freedom. And, when you think about it, money does allow for that sort of carefree attitude that to a degree protects you. That was the case of Mason Knox in Heirs to the Kingdom. He literally took all of the greatest assets for himself, and then he used them to conquer the people who were poor and proclaim himself a king in waiting and ruler supreme. And one has to ask, is that going to happen in the world today? Now the point here, and it should actually be noted, that even though this CEO said things that are not really that acceptable to anyone who believes passionately in civil liberty, the fact remains that no matter how unsavoury his statement was, he didn't actually lie. He was honest about his opinion, and his belief that a world ruled by a ruthless and select group would actually benefit the oppressors greatly was the truth. His freedom, because of his status, outweighed our freedom, because ultimately those with means control those who have none. It does feel like a new form of feudal system where the new lords and rulers are actually the CEOs of huge corporations. I've come to believe that the greatest volume of freedom is truth. Now, when I say truth, what I mean to say is that to start with yourself and then expand it out into life. To own your truth and live by it without compromising it to fit in with all of the trends is the real power of freedom. 2 and 2 make 4, but you keep it to yourself and tell your new masters it is 5. I remember when I was young and I was hanging out with a group of hippies. One of the group, he was much older than we were, and he was pretty deeply into drugs. He'd sit to the side of all of us around, say, campfires and so forth, and he would give out these pearls of wisdom, a lot of which, to be honest, made an awful lot of sense to me at the time. One thing that really did stick with me was he spoke about the mindset of his life, and he says, freedom is a state of mind. He stated that he knew who he was, and he had no intentions of ever selling out, as he lived to suit him and who he was. He did not believe in hurting other people, and he never worried about how they lived. He chose his way, and he allowed others to live their way, and he did not concern himself with other people's opinions of him. Now, if you think about that today, there are certain ideologies within the world at the moment, and if you don't agree with them, that's fine, but you must never vocalize it, because the moment you do, the people who you're happy to live their own way and believe whatever they want to believe, they turn on you with a vengeance, and out of them comes this rhetoric of vile hate and vindictiveness, and they will do anything they can to bring you down. We call ourselves equal, but really, are we, when we cannot civilly disagree with someone? In the Curial Chronicles, we see most of this in the character of Birch. Her self-belief and ability to use her strong mind decisively are some of her greatest abilities. Birch does not allow anyone to dictate the terms of how she lives, and she refuses to apologize for who she actually is, and she remains honest and true to herself at all times. Through the whole of the series, she is the voice of reason, especially for Abigail, as Birch shows her how to open up and come to terms with not only her life, but who she really is deep inside as a person. It's Birch's honesty that shines through everything. She shies away from nothing, no matter how controversial, and she faces everything head on and speaks the truth of all situations, even when it's not appreciated. Her impact on Abby is huge, so much so that even though she's afraid most of the time, she does find the strength to own who she is, and she does confront Marjorie face to face as she defends Birch in the second book, when she presents a member of the parish council with a letter to call Marjorie into disrepute, and Marjorie attacks her verbally in the street. She snorted out of her nose like a bull. "You will regret this, Abigail Watson. You withdraw that letter before I'm done with you. I will make sure you never sit on the council." I stepped back. Her breath was awful. "Call off your dogs. Call them off, Birch, and leave us alone. That's all we've ever wanted, which is to come home from uni and live our lives. Let us do that without interference, and I will withdraw it. Carry on this 5-year vendetta, and I will face you at the next public meeting, challenge you, and have you replaced." She smirked. "You don't have the guts. All you whores know how to do is fornicate. You will not last a month." I shrugged. "Good to know one of us is getting laid. Just you try me and see, Madge." She spat on the floor at my feet. "Look at you, shaking like a leaf. That's the problem with your generation. None of you have a spine." She was not lying. I was terrified. My legs were shaking, and at this point, even I was not aware of how long I could actually keep this up. "Yes, Madge, I'm scared. I'm just like everyone else in this village. We're all scared, but someone has to make a stand. As your favourite target, who is tired of being shamed by you with your lies about me, I want to set an example to this village. So call off your dogs, or I will not stop until you're ousted." She screamed in my face and I almost peed. My pants were damp. There was definitely some leakage. Never! I stepped back. Then we are done talking. I turned and walked in a straight line away. I just left her standing alone as everybody stared at her. I was breathing rapidly as everything in my brain crashed. What the hell had I done? The tears came. I was walking as fast as I could. I heard Jill behind me. I seldom swear, Mrs. Watson, but fuck, that was terrifying. How the hell did she do that? My bravery ended and panic surged into me. I started to run. My mum called out to me, but the tears were flowing. I could see the blurred sign of the bookshop and I tried to keep it in my sights. I ran for all I was worth and crashed through the door sobbing. Deb saw me and rushed out to meet me. Abby, what is wrong? I dodged past her, hitting the bookcase, scattering books everywhere as I tripped and stumbled. My heartbeat was thumping in my head as I ran to the back where I knew the toilet was, but it was too late. I smashed in through the door and my bladder gave way and I pissed my pants. I pulled them down and sat on the toilet and just burst into tears. In many ways, this really is the turning point in Abigail's life because not only did she stand up for herself, the whole village sees her do something that none of them have ever had the strength or guts to do. Her legs were shaking and she was terrified, but nonetheless, she held her ground for the first time ever in her life. And even though in that moment she had no real idea of what she was doing, in days to come, she began to see herself in a very different light. It really is a very important message. And, it's one the whole village really needed to see. And it does change her life, even if she does not understand that straight away. When you think about it, if you take a look around, we live in a world of fakes and frauds. One half are all pretending to be something bigger than they are, who are also offended by the smallest of things. And the other half are part of a system working for control of the masses. Being you in a world of people who have no ability to be themselves is so hard. It does take stamina. And there are times when you have to dig so deep to stay your course, no matter how rough it gets. Speaking up honestly, even when you know that no one will listen or agree with you, is one of the hardest things that you can do. But if you dig deep enough inside and you find your truth, only then will you feel the shackles of the dogma of society fall away. I've had so many conversations where people use sentences such as, I wish I could do that, or I really want to do that. Having the power of mind to make a choice and then stick to it is actually the key. And I've always told people that if you want to do it that bad, well, as long as it doesn't harm others, just do it. It never surprises me to see people shrink back with fear because some fake preconceived notion that maybe their friends will disapprove or people will say something completely and utterly rules their lives. The power of other people's opinions is so strong, and I feel that really is sad. And it is sad that people feel they've got to deny their own truth and hold themselves back because of the fear of what other people think, and they live their lives unfulfilled and miserable because of it. We now live in a world of censorship, compelled language, mass media, and social oppression. And each and every day we're bombarded with messages about how we should live and how we should all conform to a certain set narrative that at times most of us actually disagree with it as it goes against our better judgment. And yet we oblige simply for peace. Fear is used by the media to create hysteria and sensationalize everything. and we're told that we must buy more, spend more, and own more in order to be happy and acceptable. That is not freedom. It's no different from a monkey who is hungry and wants a banana, but is too afraid to get one for fear of the pack attacking them. Being you is now considered to be a radical act. Speaking up for what you believe in is becoming a revolutionary act, as society is pressured into conformity, which is what I show in the books that I have written. The world today is filled with people who are depressed, anxious, isolated, and sad, and it is because they conform when their whole being screams at them not to, and yet they have not found the inner strength to say, I'm not doing this because this is wrong. Freedom most definitely is a state of mind. It's not a place. It's not a utopian ideal or form of anarchy. It is the feeling of knowing that no matter what, you stuck to your guns and did not back down. And through that, you protected your integrity. I've read many things about how freedom is a way of life, a new beginning, an open space. But honestly, I'm not convinced. I think life happens no matter what, and the real value of freedom is how you think of yourself and navigate the world around you whilst hurting no one else. Having the ability to think critically and be able to look at something and determine, is this right for me, is a skill set that clears the negativity from your mind. If you can let go of the societal view, live in peace, and live by your own beliefs in who you actually are, then you will have the power to move forward, living in any place, any situation, and you'll be able to live true to yourself. I've shown this in the stories that I write, be it the way people live in Heirs to the Kingdom, or how Branagh in Rise of the Raven survives in the wild, living free as a bird, or how Birch manages to bring out the true power of Abby in the Curial Chronicles to show her how to live and be true to herself. All of these are examples within my stories of the true capital of understanding the real value of freedom. And again, Ronnie puts it perfectly in Abigail's Summer. Be you and appreciate each other. If you've listened all the way through that and taken note of it, then I offer you a really, really huge thank you for listening and taking the time to just, click open the video and actually sit patient and listen. I think there's a lot of food for thought there, a lot of things to think about, and, that is actually the wonder of books. Because, the book reading world is kind of shrinking. It's such a shame because books do offer us a way or an insight into other people's minds and other people's imaginations. And it allows us to see the world from as many different viewpoints as possible. And in doing so, that really does actually open people's minds and help educate them. So if you're an avid reader and you love books and you read a lot of books, then more power to you. And I will say to pretty much anyone who tunes in here today and listens to this, the future has got to be in great creative writing. It disappoints me greatly that a lot of people are changing their writing styles so that they can conclude, sort of all this new idealized political dogma that we seem to hear on the streets at all times. And by all means, write a representation of it and show it from one side, but please don't forget, there's an opposing view, and don't be afraid to write about that. Every book reader and every writer needs to oppose censorship. Every year, more and more books are becoming banned. And I think that's a terrible, terrible thing. And I never, ever want to see a time like we've seen in the past where the burning of books becomes an accepted norm in society. I'll be back next week, and again, I will come up with something that hopefully will open your mind and make you think. And in between now and then, keep reading books, keep turning the pages, keep broadening your minds, and I will see you next week. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Writer Life podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, or there are areas of Robin's stories you would like him to discuss, please add your thoughts and questions in the comments, and we will include them in a future episode. You can follow Robin on all his social media links, which you will find listed below, and please, like and subscribe to this channel, so you get the latest notifications when he posts. All Robin's books are available in digital and print formats to purchase or download through all online book sales sites.